Okay, we're in southwest Georgia and we're looking at the site of Camp Sumter, better known as Andersonville. And from February of 1864 to about April of 1865, this was a major prisoner of war camp. Approximately 33,000 people were imprisoned here, and about 13,000, almost 14,000 of them never left. Where I'm standing right now is the headquarters, and from here you could see almost everything over the fence, but not quite. Let's take a look and see how it would have been for the prisoners. So the reason they picked Andersonville was because it was really isolated from every place else. It had a source of water, which you'll see in a little bit, and it had a population that was small enough, maybe 20 people, that wasn't going to raise a big ruckus about they don't want that Yankee prison in my backyard. The prisoners would come in on a train. Amherst had a train depot, and they would get off and they would be marched down this road into the prison camp. So this is what's called the North Gate. It's not the original gate, but it's a recreation that they made to give you a taste of what it might have been like. And the prisoners would have been marched up here and divided into groups of 90. And those 90 guys were going to share their food and take roll call together, and they were kind of your unit while you were here. You'd walk through the first gate. They'd open the big doors wide if you were a whole bunch of people. They'd open that smaller door if it was just one or two people. You would come in here, and they would explain about things like the deadline, which is a thin railing that goes all the way around the inside perimeter of the camp. And if you walk into that deadline, they will shoot you dead. Some people actually used it to commit suicide if they'd had enough of this place. Once you walked through, you basically saw an image of hell, especially as the summer went on. They didn't have enough food. Their one little source of drinking water was polluted with all kinds of crap and waste from the guards and waste from the other prisoners. The three biggest causes of death here were diarrhea, dysentery, and scurvy. And diarrhea and dysentery both come from not having clean water. They would appoint one person as the sergeant of your mess, and he would divide the food up amongst all the people in it. And to be fair about it, he would put it all in a blanket in little squares, and he would have somebody turn around, and he would point to a square and say, "Who gets this portion?" The guy would say a name, and that guy got that portion. He'd point to another one and ask the guy who wasn't looking, "Who gets this one?" And the guy would say. And that was how they avoided fighting over he got more, he didn't, He picked me because he doesn't like me, so he gave me the small one, whatever. The camp originally was 16 acres, which is about the size of 16 football fields. In July of 1864, they added another 10 acres, but it ended up so that each person had about 6 square feet of space, and there were about 33,000 guys in here by August of 1864. It's really kind of hard to see now, but where that little row of heavy bushes, that was their water supply, Sweetwater Creek. And of the 33,000 or so people that were in here, about 13,000 never left, and they're in the cemetery over in back of the woods. You'd come in through the north gate, and a lot of the guys would leave it through the south gate. That's those 2 stone pillars. It looks like one from my angle. Down there, they would carry you out if you were going to the hospital, or if you were dead and going to the dead house, and then you'd be carried off to the cemetery. And the hospital wasn't that good either. If you went to the hospital, you probably weren't coming back. One of the more famous stories about Andersonville has to do with this little building that I'm looking at now. The water was filthy, the prisoners were dying, they knew the water was disgusting, but they had no choice, and so they prayed and prayed for a source of clean water. And the story goes that one night there was a big storm, and there might have been a lightning strike, but for whatever reason, a spring of clear water started founting up right out of the ground right there. They took it as a miracle. The hard part about buying it as a miracle is the fact that if you look over here, you see the post that shows where the deadline was. The spring was actually inside the deadline. But the guards were pretty cool. They'd let the prisoners put buckets on sticks and reach through the fence to get their water. And eventually they were able to kind of carve out a trough and pull the water into the prison camp itself. The signs down there will tell you don't drink the water, it's not safe, but somebody told me that it's actually cleaner than the water that they serve off the tap in Andersonville. I can't vouch to that, but I'm not going to try it. The building itself was built by returning veterans from the prisoner of war camp that came back afterwards for reunions and monument dedications and stuff, and I think the date on it is 1904. One of the biggest causes of death I mentioned was diarrhea. The ironic thing is, let's see if I can see it from here. Usually it's going. Oh, can't see it from here right now. I think the factory's closed and they've all gone home. The prison is actually built on one of the world's richest supplies of a mineral called kaolin. And one of the things you can do with kaolin is make a product called kaopectate, which is a cure for diarrhea. I'm told that a couple of the older people that live in the area will still eat a tablespoonful of the clay every day just to get their little dose of kaolin. But the prisoners had no idea of that, and so they died of dehydration and diarrhea because they didn't know they were sitting on top of the cure for it. So here we are at the pavilion to the Providence Springs, and as I said earlier, this was built by returning POWs. It's early in the morning, the trucks are out, but I thought you'd like to take a look at what they did here. With charity to all and malice towards none is a quotation by Abraham Lincoln. And I was wrong about the date. It was actually erected in 1901. Erected by National Association of Union Ex-Prisoners of War in memory of the 52,345 comrades who were confined here. That number sounds a little bit high to me, but that's what the sign says. It's hard to imagine even today how many people die for want of clean water. And here's a photograph on a sign outside the pavilion where the Providence Spring is. And it says that this picture was taken in 1897. So that's what it looked like before they had the big fancy neoclassical temple built around it. The prison's water supply source was called a branch of the Sweetwater Creek, and it was in where all those bushes are. With 30,000 people, this was just a total swamp and absolute disaster to have to walk down to. And if you had diarrhea and you were 3 football fields away from here, you probably weren't going to make it anyway. This is what it looked like. There are only about 11 photographs of the prison camp when it was in play, and this is one of them. I've always felt kind of bad for that one guy who's got his butt hanging out in the picture, but he probably didn't know the difference. You can't really see it, but you can kind of hear it. This is the Sweetwater Creek that was the drinking supply, toilet, and washing place for all of the men in the camp. It's really grown over, and I'm not going to go down there to get a better look at the water because they tell me there's every kind of snake in Georgia in here, and there's signs that say not to. They say that the stench here was so bad that people in Americus would complain, and Americus is a 20-minute car ride from here, so you're talking a really big stink. It's really hard to imagine, especially on a quiet morning like this, when there's nobody around but me and the crickets, the horrors and the terrible things that went on here. Some of the stories are just bone-chilling. There's a story about a man who had gangrene, and they took him to the prison hospital, and he said to the doctor, "Please amputate my feet," because his feet were rotting and they were killing him. And the doctor said, "No, you're dying anyway, I'm not going to waste my time." So he got a hold of a knife and he cut off his own feet. His name was John January. There's a story, you can see where the row of really thick brush is, that's where the stream is, that people would go down by the stream, and if somebody had diarrhea and beans or corn had passed through their bodies undigested and come out the other end, people would actually pick it up and eat it. That's how desperate they were to survive. If you were one of the ones who was unlucky enough to die here, your buddies would carry you to the south gate, they would leave a piece of paper with your name and your regiment on it, and then they would wait for you to be carried out. The wagons that carried the food in the morning carried the dead out in the afternoon. They'd stack them on a wagon, they would take them down, and they'd go down that road there towards the prison cemetery. If you weren't one of the lucky ones, this is where you'd end up. And approximately 1 in 4 of everybody that walked through those gates that we saw is still here. Originally, the first guy died 2 days after he arrived, 2 days after the camp opened. And the first few people had coffins, and their graves are fairly far apart. But the farther you go, there are no coffins, and the graves are really, really close together. They're maybe 10 or 11 inches. And they were dying so fast that they couldn't dig individual graves at the end, so they would just dig one long trench, lay body after body after body after body, cover it up, put soil over it, put a numbered stake where each body was, and it wasn't until after the war that they were able to come and put actual grave markers. And it's kind of amazing. This is one of the few prisons where they actually have very few unknown soldiers, although there are some. And it's largely in part to this guy, because the Confederates had him keep a list of all the dead. And when he was done, he copied the list, smuggled it out so that the Union would have it and the Confederates couldn't destroy it. And so all of the people here, because of this fellow Dorrance Atwater, actually have names on their stones. So I hope that the next time you have Veterans Day or Memorial Day, that you'll think of this and remember this. Because these guys didn't all have to fight. They could have changed sides once they got into the prison, but they chose death before dishonor, many of them. And so they deserve our respect and our thanks. This is Andersonville National Cemetery.